$4.2 billion wasted. 2 astronauts trapped in space for months. Boeing Starliner lost control multiple times mid-flight. NASA had to send SpaceX to rescue them because Starliner was too dangerous. But here's the crazy part. Boeing wants to fly again, and NASA might actually let them. How is this possible? What's really going on behind closed doors? Let's dive right in. NASA faces a critical decision. They need 2 companies to fly astronauts to space after the space shuttle retirement. The bidding war begins. SpaceX, the upstart company that barely existed a decade ago, gets $2.6 billion. Boeing, the aerospace giant with 100 years of experience, gets $4.2 billion. Nearly double the money. Why? Because everyone knew Boeing was the safe choice. But what if I told you that the safe choice would become the most dangerous gamble in NASA's history? December 2019. Boeing's first unmanned test flight. The mission was simple. Fly to the International Space Station, dock, and return. Basic stuff for a company that built the Apollo command module. Instead, Starliner burned through fuel like a drunk sailor spending money. A software bug caused the spacecraft to think it was in the wrong time zone. Not kidding. The clock was off, so the engines fired at the wrong time. If astronauts had been aboard, they would have died. A simple software error nearly turned into a human tragedy. NASA wasn't just disappointed, they were horrified. The investigation revealed something shocking. Boeing had over 60 critical problems with Starliner. 60? That's not debugging, that's systematic failure. But here's what really happened behind closed doors. Boeing's engineers knew about many of these problems months before the flight. They chose to fly anyway. Why? Because admitting delay would mean admitting they were behind SpaceX. After the 2019 disaster, Boeing promised NASA they'd fix everything. They claimed they had identified the root causes. They said 2022 would be different, but internal documents later revealed the truth. Boeing was playing whack-a-mole with problems. Fix one issue, 3 more appear. Their testing facilities couldn't simulate real flight conditions. They were learning about critical failures during actual missions. Meanwhile, SpaceX was flying astronauts safely. Dragon had completed multiple missions flawlessly. The contrast was embarrassing. NASA faced a choice: admit Boeing was failing or double down on the $4.2 billion investment. They chose to double down. May 2022, Boeing's second test flight. This time, they actually reached the space station. Success story, right? Wrong. Multiple thrusters failed during flight. The spacecraft's propulsion system had been delayed for over a year because valves got stuck shut. Moisture was getting into the fuel lines, causing chemical reactions that corroded the hardware. Neither Boeing nor their suppliers caught this during testing. They only discovered it when the valves wouldn't open on the launch pad. But NASA was getting desperate. The space station needed 2 different crew vehicles. They couldn't afford to lose Boeing, so they approved the first crewed mission. Think about that decision. They approved human flight on a spacecraft that had failed multiple critical tests. June 5, 2024. Launch day, 2 veteran astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sita Williams, climbed into Starliner for what was supposed to be an 8-day mission. Instead, it became a months-long nightmare. Minutes after launch, helium started leaking from the propulsion system. Then thrusters began failing. Not just 1 or 2, but multiple units across different systems. The spacecraft was bleeding fuel and losing control. But here's the terrifying part. Starliner lost the ability to control its attitude multiple times. The astronauts couldn't steer properly. They were flying blind in a metal coffin. NASA has ironclad rules. If a spacecraft loses control authority, abort immediately. But they didn't abort. They let it continue to the station. Why? Because the political cost of failure was too high. The astronauts reached the station, but when it came time to return home, NASA made a decision that shocked the aerospace world. They declared Starliner too dangerous to carry humans back to Earth. Let that sink in. The same spacecraft that NASA approved for human flight was suddenly too risky for human flight. So who rescued the astronauts? SpaceX. Boeing's competitor had to save Boeing's crew. The irony was devastating. Starliner returned to Earth empty like a ghost ship. The astronauts who went up in a Boeing spacecraft came home in a SpaceX Dragon. The symbolism couldn't be clearer. After Starliner's empty return, NASA conducted a thorough investigation. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. The helium leaks were caused by overheating in critical valves. When the valves got too hot, they expanded and blocked fuel flow. NASA couldn't predict when this would happen or how many thrusters would fail. But here's the kicker. This wasn't the first time Boeing had these exact problems. The same overheating issue had delayed previous missions. The same valve problems had caused failures before. Boeing kept fixing symptoms instead of addressing root causes. They were playing Russian roulette with astronaut lives. While SpaceX built Dragon with 28 thrusters, Boeing gave Starliner 52. They claimed more thrusters meant more safety, more backup systems. They got it backwards. More parts mean more failure points. When several thrusters failed simultaneously, it created cascading failures that nearly killed the crew. But the real problem wasn't the number of thrusters. It was Boeing's approach to testing. They never built a facility where they could test the complete spacecraft system. Software and hardware were tested separately. Critical bugs were only discovered during real flights with real astronauts. This is like building a car and only testing the brakes while driving on the highway. So why does NASA keep trusting Boeing despite failure after failure? The answer isn't technical, it's political. Boeing spends over $15 million annually on lobbying. Their executive ranks are filled with former NASA administrators, Pentagon officials, and congressional staff. It's a revolving door where government insiders become Boeing employees, then return to government positions. When NASA was distributing contracts, Boeing received preferential treatment. In 2019, they got an extra $287 million bonus just for staying on schedule, even though they were already years behind. SpaceX, which was ahead of schedule and under budget, got nothing extra. A government audit later revealed NASA overpaid Boeing by hundreds of millions just to keep them competitive. Taxpayers funded Boeing's failures. Former Boeing employees have blown the whistle on what's really happening inside the company. They describe a culture where financial metrics matter more than engineering excellence. Safety reviews were shortened to save money. Quality inspections were reduced to meet deadlines. Hardware was approved before it was ready because schedule pressure was intense. This isn't just about Starliner. Remember the Boeing 737 MAX crashes that killed 346 people? Same pattern. Cost-cutting and schedule pressure led to deadly shortcuts. When airplanes crash, it makes headlines. When spacecraft fail, it happens in the vacuum of space where fewer people are watching. Boeing doesn't build Starliner in-house. They rely on dozens of suppliers for critical components. When those suppliers make mistakes, astronauts pay the price. The valve problems that delayed Starliner for over a year, that came from an outside supplier who didn't properly test their product. The supplier used materials that corroded when exposed to moisture. Neither the supplier nor Boeing caught this flaw during development. They only discovered it during a critical test when the valves wouldn't open. This distributed manufacturing approach makes quality control nearly impossible. No single person or team understands the entire system. While Boeing executives collect bonuses and NASA administrators attend meetings, real people suffer the consequences. Butch Wilmore and Sita Williams were supposed to be in space for 8 days. Instead, they spent months dealing with Boeing's incompetence. Their families didn't see them for months because one company couldn't build a working spacecraft. The extended mission disrupted other astronaut rotations. Scientific experiments were delayed. The entire space station program suffered because Boeing couldn't deliver. Let's examine the financial devastation. Boeing received $4.2 billion for Starliner development. SpaceX got $2.6 billion for Dragon development. Today, Dragon has flown over 30 successful crewed missions. Starliner has flown 0 operational missions. That's a $1.6 billion premium for a spacecraft that doesn't work. Where did that extra money go? Into a system so complicated that even Boeing doesn't fully understand it. They built a spacecraft with 52 thrusters, but couldn't predict when they would fail. NASA's investigation revealed Boeing skipped critical integration tests. They never properly tested how the spacecraft's software and hardware work together under real conditions. Instead, they relied on computer simulations and separate component testing. When those simulations proved wrong during actual flights, astronauts nearly died. This isn't how aerospace engineering works. Every system must be tested to failure. Every possible malfunction must be understood before human flight. Boeing treated spaceflight like a routine software project. They planned to debug problems in production. 2014, Boeing gets $4.2 billion, SpaceX gets $2.6 billion. 2019, Boeing's first test completely fails. 2020, SpaceX begins regular crewed flights. 2021, Boeing's mission delayed 1 year due to valve problems. 2022, Boeing's second test has multiple thruster failures. 2024, crewed mission nearly ends in disaster, requires SpaceX rescue. 2025, Starliner still not approved for operational use. Meanwhile, SpaceX has been operating safely for 5 years. The performance gap is staggering. Today, Boeing claims they've identified and fixed 70% of Starliner's problems. But what about the remaining 30%? Those are the issues that could kill astronauts. They're redesigning the battery system, replacing the landing airbags, and planning another test flight. But none of this addresses the fundamental problems with their approach. The same engineers who created this mess are now promising to fix it. The same management culture that prioritized cost over safety is still in charge. The International Space Station is scheduled to retire in 2030. At the current pace, Starliner might not achieve operational status before then. NASA's entire backup plan could collapse. They spent $4.2 billion on a spacecraft that might never carry astronauts regularly. The space station could end its mission with only one working crew vehicle. This isn't just embarrassing, it's strategically dangerous. What happens if Dragon has a problem? NASA would have no way to reach the station. How many more chances will NASA give Boeing? How many more billions will taxpayers spend on a failing program? What happens when the next test flight reveals more critical problems? The most disturbing question: what other safety shortcuts is Boeing taking that we don't know about yet? Boeing's failures aren't just technical problems. They're symptoms of a culture that puts profit over people. Until that culture changes, giving them more opportunities is gambling with astronaut lives. The saddest part of this story isn't the wasted money or delayed missions, it's the lost potential. While Boeing struggled with basic engineering, SpaceX revolutionized spaceflight. Imagine if Boeing had used their resources and experience to actually innovate instead of playing politics. Imagine if they had built a spacecraft that worked instead of a system designed to extract maximum profit. The space industry could have had 2 world-class crew vehicles. Instead, we have 1 working spacecraft and 1 expensive failure. Boeing's $4.2 billion disaster isn't just a financial loss. It's a betrayal of everything NASA is supposed to represent: excellence, innovation, safety. Instead, we got corporate welfare disguised as aerospace engineering. So here we are, $4.2 billion spent on a spacecraft that can't safely carry humans. Meanwhile, SpaceX built a working system for $1.6 billion less. This isn't just about Boeing's failures. It's about what happens when politics trumps engineering, when connections matter more than competence. The real question isn't whether Boeing will fix Starliner. It's whether NASA will finally admit that throwing good money after bad isn't a strategy, it's insanity. But here's what really keeps me up at night. If this is what we see in the spotlight of human spaceflight, what's happening in the shadows of defense contracts and government programs we don't monitor as closely, the space industry is at a crossroads. We can either reward excellence or subsidize mediocrity. We can either demand accountability or accept endless excuses. What do you think? Should NASA cut their losses with Boeing? Or is there still hope for Starliner? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the future of American aerospace? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to dive deeper into how SpaceX actually got it right, check out our breakdown of the Raptor engine. It's a masterclass in engineering done properly. Boeing is selling ULA forever, and it's all because of one SpaceX mission. December 2025, SpaceX's Falcon Heavy launches NASA's Viper rover to the moon. Cost? $90 million. ULA's Vulcan would charge $200 million for half the payload. But here's what nobody saw coming. Boeing just lost $10.7 billion while SpaceX dominated with 138 launches versus ULA's pathetic 3. Why is this Viper mission the death blow? What makes Falcon Heavy so unstoppable? And who's buying ULA's corpse? Let's dive right in. So Boeing is selling ULA forever. But why now? What makes this Viper mission the final nail in the coffin? The answer lies in a catastrophic chain of events that started with Boeing's aviation disasters and ended with SpaceX proving they're untouchable. Let me show you exactly how this unfolded. Picture this. You're running a space company, and your parent corporation just lost $10.7 billion in a single year. That's not just bad, that's business-ending catastrophic. Boeing's profit margins didn't just decline, they plummeted to negative 6.1%. Every single day, Boeing was hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured fuel tank. Where do you think that money was supposed to come from? ULA's development budgets. But here's what makes this truly brutal. ULA's own profits were already in free fall, from a peak of $650 million in 2016 to a pathetic $80 million by 2023. That's an 87% collapse in just 7 years. Think about that math for a second. ULA was making less money than some tech startups while trying to compete with the most innovative rocket company in history. How was that ever going to work? The timeline tells the real story. As SpaceX perfected reusability, ULA's profits evaporated. Coincidence? Not even close. December 2025. NASA faces the most critical decision in lunar exploration since Apollo. They need to land a $433 million rover on the moon's south pole, the key to humanity's space future. Who do they choose? SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. But why is this decision so devastating for ULA? Because it proves everything we've been saying about their obsolete technology. Let me break down the brutal numbers. Falcon Heavy capacity, 63.8 tons to low Earth orbit. Vulcan Centaur capacity,